Ready right now. Okay. Okay.
All right. And I want to welcome you on behalf of many different groups that I'm part of, but most especially on behalf of the Gestalt Center for Coaching, which, as you know, is both in Istanbul and in Toronto, and also for all of our work that you and I have been colleagues in. The first work that we did at the International Gestalt Coaching Program in Cleveland, where we were so proud of your leadership. And as I know you, I'd like to tell all the people that are present. Anne got her PhD in organizational psychology from the prestigious Columbia University in New York. She also co-authored a wonderful book on organizational development with the famous Warner Burke, who always credits Anne with being a fellow thought leader. She was early in the accreditation as a master certified coach. And she has been both a coach and a consultant to rather famous organizations that many of you will know, from the UN to the World Bank, from Ford Motors to the Cleveland Clinic, in many different sectors. And so Anne has always brought, I call it modest leadership, both very quiet, but very deep and profound. One of Anne's very deep goals is, actually I'm going to pause for a moment. If anybody, hi there, Begler. If anybody is on video, just mute yourself for a moment. I so want to be connected with you, and I'm so responsive to any sound. So thank you. Anne brings what I call, in the tradition of David Rock, who does quiet leadership, Anne brings modest leadership. And by that I mean she always makes her coaching and organizational development about the that we would just call values, and in bringing a sense of fairness to all of her work. So the concept of working at the different levels of system is a concept that Anne always brings, from working at the individual level to really working at the greater different levels of dyad, group, and organization. She is the author of OASIS Conversations, Leading with an Open Mindset to Maximize Potential. And I think it's very important that I stress that particular book that she published just last year, because that comes off of many years of her working with the OASIS model that she first introduced at the United Nations. And they're still working with that model 20 years after she's introduced it, where thousands of people are actually working it, although she now actually certifies people in that model. When you work with Anne, you always will feel very supported in your own thinking, but you will also feel very supported in looking at what the cutting edge is. So I know that I'm inviting Andrea, who is our driver for the day, to invite us to have a gallery view of those who are here present. But I also want to say to all the people who couldn't join us today, we welcome you when you receive this audio. And as many of you know, we've had some challenges with the audio, so with the videotaping. So we thank you, Andrea, for coming to our aid. And Anne, I want to just say, as I turn this over to you, I always feel, and I've known you for really almost 30 years, I always feel a sense of pride in who you are as a professional and gratitude for who you are as a human being. It never gets old what you bring, and you're ever thoughtful. So it's a moment of awareness in the tradition of the awareness IQ model that we're talking about, to welcome you and to turn this over to you. And to everybody who's here, welcome. I see you, Adria from Toronto. Hi there. Nice of yours. Welcome, and nice to see you. And I turn now and I welcome your voice, and I'm going to put myself on mute. Oh, and one more thing, Anne. I'm going to be monitoring the chat, and if there's any questions that people raise, I really want to invite you to write them down, because I think, Anne, one of the things, you're brilliant at so many things, but you love when people ask questions so that you can, in the moment, bring in something that maybe you hadn't quite addressed, but someone really has been resonating to. So with that, over to you.
Well, thank you, Dorothy, and just glad to be here with all of you who are here today, as well as those who may be listening at a later point. And you're right, Dorothy, I do like an interactive session. I have been using Zoom recently because I have an online program on Zoom, and I think we still can get a great quality of interaction. So, but thank you, I'm happy to be here today. I will pull us over to my slides to show you a few things. Okay, and here we are. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so welcome again. I'm really happy to be here with you all, and I'm looking forward to sharing this with you. So as you know, I don't need to spend a lot of time on this. It's really.
Sure.
Can you hear it? Can you hear? Can everybody hear? Okay. It's really in the workplace and life right now. You've probably heard the term VUCA. It's really just a volatile, uncertain, and complex, ambiguous world at the moment. There's a lot of disruption, and basically,
There you are. You're here.
Okay. And many people are just feeling disconnection. And I see this in all individual clients, as well as many organizations. This is a huge issue. So there really is a great need to shift from disconnection to connection. So there's a lot of disagreements, a lot of polarization, distrust, a lot of disrespect. So you're seeing this in all different levels, in the world really today. So we really need to bring about some kind of shift, and we have needed this for some time. And really, results happen one conversation at a time and with an open mindset. So that's actually what I'm proposing, that how do we deal with this polarization and create an environment of trust? And I think it comes through having an open mindset. So I don't think it's surprising, but so much energy is wasted. This is what really upsets me, is all the time I see so many misunderstandings, so many misinformed judgments. And this is taking a lot of energy. So I work a lot in companies with leaders, and much of the time, I'd say 80% of the time with the senior leaders I'm working with, a lot of their energy is focused on their boss or their colleagues. And a lot of it is this misunderstanding. And it's really at all different levels. So what do we do about it? That's how do we create things together? So basically, one of my clients recently said, "Oh, what I'm proposing is practical emotional intelligence." And I'm not going to spend a lot of time today, but I think you all probably have been hopefully familiar with that. Emotional intelligence, there's some research that shows that 60% of all competencies are deemed essential for high performance are related to emotional intelligence. EI matters twice as much as technical knowledge. A study showed that there's a high correlation between EI and leaders' profitability. So even a lot of other research shows that about 80% of the differential, it does basically in organizations, most people are at a pretty high IQ level, but the differentiating factor is this ability to be emotionally intelligent. And what do we mean by that? The elements of emotional intelligence are really to be self-aware. So all of this is related to Dorothy's work on awareness, IQ. But basically that self-awareness is critical. There was a study done at Stanford, and they talked to many leaders, and they said, what do you think? These are leaders that are on boards. And many of those, almost universally, all the board members said they thought the most important factor for success is self-awareness. They did a similar study with managers, and most all of them said, I don't have time for self-awareness. I'm too busy. I'm too stressed. I'm really high stressed. So in fact, many even senior level leaders tell me the only time they have to reflect is in the coaching session, which is really difficult nowadays. And I just was talking to a leader yesterday who worked in a very large company, and he said all of the leaders are just action upon action upon action because it's fear-based and they're so stressed. So how do we create self-awareness? So EI, emotional intelligence, is self-awareness, and then self-management. How do you manage yourself? Instead of reacting, how do we be aware? And then We also need to be aware of others and be aware of the environment. That's the social awareness. And then how to manage relationships. So these are the core elements that Daniel Goleman has written about over the last couple of decades and many others. And I just put my OASIS model. When I developed it over 20 years ago, I wasn't thinking, and emotional intelligence was rather a new concept then. But I do see that this process does support emotional intelligence. So the O and the A of the OASIS process, which I'm going to talk about next, relates to self-awareness and the other pieces. So what my goals of today with you is just take a couple minutes to consider the importance of respect. I want to review my OASIS conversation process with you, take a little more deep dive on the S, the first S of OASIS, which is shifting to being open, and then any questions or reflections. Are there any questions now or any comments yet? Okay. So I want to start with this issue of what is respect. It sounds obvious and we think we all know what respect is, but I find this is actually a core concept that's worth addressing. I spend a lot of time on this in some of the systems I work with. So I have for over 30 years been helping organizations to create environments of respect. So it could be hospitals, as I said, the UN is one of them, where I did their leadership program, but many different systems. One case recently that just came up that was interesting is this example. There was a leader and he had a big presentation that he was giving at his company, and it was with clients and the whole organization. So it was a big deal for him. It's a culmination of a lot of work in a big study. And so many of his team members ended up not joining and not attending this meeting, even though they said they would. Some said, "I'll see you later," or "good luck," the day of the presentation. So he believed they were going to be attending this presentation, expected them to because they worked for him. And in fact, he didn't, in fact, most of his team did not come. So he called me and said, "I'm going to be leaving this organization and my team." And he felt that he was not being, probably they've not told him that he was not really being an effective leader. He had another factor, is that his boss, his good friend became his boss in a reorganization, and that relationship, that boss wasn't talking to him that much too. So those factors together made him feel that he must not have been an effective leader. As we talked, he realized he did not check out his assumptions, but he'd been suffering for several weeks after his presentation, even though the presentation was quite successful. But in the end, so he felt disrespected. That was actually his core issue. And after he went to speak with them and used the OASIS process, which he'd forgotten to do at that moment, what happened was they actually had a big problem with a client, and that the day of his presentation. So his team actually thought the most respectful thing to do was not to inform him about the problem, because they didn't want to disrupt him. And actually, they took care of the problem during his presentation. And I don't know why, but they failed to bring it up with him thereafter. I guess he was so involved after that. So it basically, the problem was solved and they went on without him. So this is just a little example, and I see this all the time, of things that look clearly like disrespect and people really feel it. In the end, if we were able to have the conversation about it, we could maybe find out that that was wrong, or we could really work through the issue. But what's really interesting is time and again, I find that people do not have the conversation. So they don't have conversations that would lead to better respect, because they feel certain, based on their assumptions and their feelings, that that the other person did something wrong or something disrespectful. And we don't really feel we have the words often to talk about these issues. I learned a lot about this. Another company I worked with, we had I won't go into all the detail, but what the problem there was, one of the key people, as people came into work, because they had varied work hours, she did not say hello to people. So other people would talk about her and said, "Wow, don't you think Casey's rude? She doesn't say hello to us in the morning. She must not like us." So there kind of had two factions, people that were on Casey's side, people that were on the other person's side. And they basically, I know none of you have always had this experience, but they basically, energy in the whole system started happening against the other. And nobody really began to could figure out what was happening, but I was called in to work with this team. And in most teams I'm called into, the core problem often is this issue of respect underneath of it. People are often not aware of it. In this case, what happened was one of the core people, Casey, she didn't like to be interrupted, and she felt personally for her, being respectful would be not to interrupt people because everyone was coming in at different hours in the morning. So she did what she felt was respectful. She didn't say hello to people. Other people felt that she was disrespectful, not saying hello. So where do you think we get these rules about saying hello? I know I don't have you all on mute, but I don't want to interrupt you. But basically, these rules come from early learnings. And I work all over the world, and people had all different learnings about saying hello, not saying hello. Some people said that they never said hello till after 10 in the morning, till their mother had their coffee. So everybody had different rules depending on what culture. Some cultures, it's very formal. You walk around. I don't know if they still do it these days, but at the time I worked in France, everybody shook hands. So there's a lot of different rules about even as simple things as saying hello, but we have a feeling everybody should be knowing the right way to do it. So this issue of respect is very important. We have to catch ourselves and look again and see each person as an individual and be paying attention to ourself, our verbal, our nonverbal patterns, and always checking over there and saying, does it land? Are other people receiving the respect I'm intending? Or am I noticing that perhaps there's some other issue? So basically, really the biggest challenge of respect is that we all think of respect differently. So I work in different companies, and I usually give an exercise where I have people share what is respectful behavior for them and what isn't. And they're often very small things. I remember one woman, she was upset because she had long hair and she'd wear headphones, and people would be walking by and start talking to her as they were coming down the hall, but they would not be aware that she was actually on the phone with the client. So little simple things. In that same company, the boss wanted people to wait outside her door when they had an appointment. So that means they were right there when she needed them, for her next appointment to keep her on schedule. But the person right next door, the other manager, actually wanted people to go back to their desk, and he would call them. So these are hundreds of little things that we expect people to know, but they're actually big things. So we feel judged or closed, and we don't feel respected, and we often really don't talk about these things. Because what happens is we feel disrespected, we get this kind of error detection in our brain, and we feel judgment, and we have what's called an amygdala response, so which is our amygdala excites, and then we kind of react more and we're not able to think clearly and rationally. So energy is diverted from finding solutions. So we really need to create a respectful environment. I think what I come to start thinking about is I'm challenging leaders I work with to actually take on to become aware of of their environment. And I do think it's the role of a leader to create this kind of respectful environment and to encourage it and support it, and to pay attention. Often leaders are one that's not that aware, but I think it's their role to help create that kind of environment. And the most important thing and this is something I've done all over the world, is I try to get into the system this little simple idea of like assume positive intent. So many of the leaders that I work with say that this is one of the most important things they've learned from me, and as well as OASIS, I think, but this whole concept of assuming positive intent. So many times they will call back to me and say, thank God I learned to assume positive intent, because many, many political issues happen when you don't assume that. So that's that. So now I've developed this process called OASIS as a way to have conversations so that you can have conversations about respect. And also I think the conversations is respectful. So what is an OASIS? Usually I do all this interactively, so I hope I'm going to move through this, I guess, but unless you prefer it to have, maybe I could unmute you and see if anybody does want to share. Has anybody experienced an OASIS? Does anybody on the team? Let's see. Has anybody here ever experienced what a real OASIS?
I can say something.
Okay. Let's see.
I I really actually have a very like, hello, how are you? I mean, the hello story just really captures what is my experience. And what's interesting is that moment of having enough self-support in yourself. I just lost it. Self-support in yourself when someone doesn't really know how to really respond. And when you're talking about making judgments, of course, we are wired to make judgments. That's how we use our intelligence. So slowing down that moment and still assuming positive intent when people are not giving you the nonverbal signs of respecting you enough to welcome you. And that sounds so basic, and yet we see that that sets the mood for the whole conversation.
Yeah, and that energy. And that reminds me of a professor I've had that was very famous, and people always wanted to speak to this professor. And finally, I talked to him because he would just walk by people, and everyone had a story about how disrespectful he was, and how they didn't like him, and he had no idea. He was just thinking about his concepts, and no one ever told him really. I was like one of the first people to tell him, look at the impact of you not really paying attention. And not to say it was easy, because he had a habitual pattern. We all know about habitual patterns, but we really don't. All of us need each other. We don't know. And people thought he was very disrespectful. And all he really was doing was just trying to get to his next meeting. And I see many managers this way. So how do we have to pay attention. We have to have these conversations so others can give us feedback. And we have to ask for feedback. All of this is awareness, IQ. So thank you.
So, but Anne, just before we go, just what's one little small kind of like non-shaming but invitational way for people to be a little bit more welcoming in that moment? Because some people just have habitual responses of not even having good manners.
Right. So I mean, what could he do? Someone.
Yeah.
I mean, he could also, what he began to do, what I suggested, is share his perspective and just say, hey, I hope you don't, share his intention. Hey, my intention is to be aware, but you know what? I have like many years of kind of thinking and kind of having my head down. I'm working on it. Or please don't interpret that, he actually would say this in the groups, in the classes. Hope you don't interpret that when I'm walking by, if I don't see you, because sometimes I don't see people because I'm really highly focused on internal thoughts. But that's not my intention to be disrespectful. Even that alone, sharing your intention, is very small, but very big. And a lot of leaders I work with, that's kind of the simple things that we say. And also, but you know what? It's complicated. Even I'll give you another example. In a company, I had one manager who would walk around, and he put it on his calendar because he's not good. So every day around 10 o'clock, he'd walk around just to say hello to people, but be available if they needed it. In one company, people thought it was great. Oh my gosh, he came around, we're here. But another company, they thought, oh my God, he's checking up on us. We hate him. So without sharing our intention, people are making attention, assuming all the time. So how do we share our intention? I want to be respectful and ask, what else could I do? My intention of walking around is to be available and respectful, but it's not to be checking in on you. So again, it just depends. So that's a short example. But anyway, on OASIS, has anyone ever been in a real OASIS? Okay, then I will share is that an OASIS is actually a place of fertile. I was in a desert once, driving, all the sand, it was a Jeep that was moving around. All of a sudden, then we came to this oasis. Just popped up like this. It looks like this, and there was water. There's life. There's people connecting. So a lot of people have told me that's what they do. They go to, if they live in the desert area, they go to the oasis for their holiday, their vacation. So I want to use the oasis as an image of a place of respite, a place of rejuvenation, a place of nourishment, water, support, relaxation. So that's the image that I hope, if you forget everything else, that you'll at times say, am I in the oasis? Because I think how we would create this respectful environment is by being ourselves in this open state. So these are simple concepts, but let's see. Okay, so this is my OASIS process, which I'm going to go over each of the letters. So each letter also has is for a concept. So I'll go over these. So O is for observation. A, and I also have little kinesthetic. My whole idea of this is to make it practical and memorable for managers and leaders and everybody, really. So O is observation. What am I noticing? What's out there? What's out there? A is then assuming. What do I assume? I'm aware of my assumptions, my feelings, and my background. And then S is shifting, stopping, stepping back, and being open. I is importance. What's important to me? What's important to you? What's important to us? And then the last S is solution, which is walking, which is exploring options and then taking an action. So so I try to make this memorable, which is very important to me, because I find that I love to learn. I learn incessantly. I go to many training programs, and I find that often I can't remember things. Maybe it's my old age, but I want this process is on one sheet of paper. People put it up in their conference rooms. Companies have it up there, and then I've been walking by trading room floors and hearing people say, "This is my observation. What's yours? This is what I'm assuming. What are you assuming? I'm trying to be open. No, you're not. I don't think you're shifting. I'm trying. What's important to you? What's important to me? What's important to us? And so what are we going to do?" So we'll go over this. So here's a case I would like to get your feedback on. So here's a very simple thing. This is observation. A colleague has been 30 minutes late to the last 3 staff meetings. So what you'll notice is immediately you have some response to this observable data, this situation. And so I'd like you to take a minute if you would. So O, the observation, is actually the facts. That this literally the last 3 staff meetings, this person's been late 30 minutes. That's the O for the observation. And then we want to go to the A for awareness. So this I'd like you to jot down on your paper if you would. Is I assume, I feel, and because. I assume, I feel, and because. I'll give you a moment, and I'm going to ask you to share this maybe. If you can't. I assume, I feel, and because. Sounds like a car going by.
Water.
Okay, so maybe I'll. Okay, so let's hear about if anybody would like to share. What do you assume? I assume. Can you put it in the chat box too, or just tell me? What do you assume?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Was the meeting at the same time that he missed?
Yes. The meeting started, and you have to think of your own case, a specific case. So the meeting started at 9, and the person came at 9:30, the last 3 meetings, and the meetings were, say, on Monday mornings. Okay, what do you think, Andrea? What do you assume, Andrea? Do you have a...
I'm thinking that it might not have been a good time. Mondays at that time, he may have had an appointment with his something. I feel badly because maybe he never checked in to see if that was a good time for him. And because of something that was outside of work or something.
Sorry, thanks. What other, thank you. What other assumptions do you have? Anybody?
And there is something from Paula. Paula, I don't know if you want me to read this, or I can read this and maybe you can add. Paula writes, I assume he doesn't respect the purpose of our meetings. I feel angry because I don't know his real reasons.
Okay. Great. And then anybody else? How about you, Dorothy? You have any?
Well, I assume something is going on. I feel some empathy for him, but I also feel because he has no idea how terrible the impact is.
All right, so what do you notice when you hear first the assumptions? Anybody notice anything?
That's a great question.
The assumptions come from our own experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all we have, and are they the same? Are they the same among all of us? Yeah, that's another important factor. Everybody will have a different assumption. Some people assumed there was something, that he had some other appointment perhaps, or maybe he didn't understand the timing or the importance of the meeting. There's some assume of disrespect. So there's always, my experience with doing this kind of exercise, of course, this example contributes it, but about 80% of the time, it's negative. It's negative. So we tend to have negative assumptions, and that's human nature to go for the negative. And then there's something called negative attribution error. So basically, basically, this is a social psychology principle that it's in our nature to assess the motives of others, and our first instinct is to assume negativity in the others. Again, this goes back to why I say assume positive intent, because our nature is to assume negative intent. And why do you think that would help us? It's built into us to assume negative intent. It's helpful. I mean, it's actually a very helpful thing, because then we're on guard. Then we're ready to run out of the room. Like if right now, all of a sudden I stood up and started doing somersaults, you'd say, okay, she went a bit crazy, and you might turn off this machine. So this negative intent is useful, but it's built into us. We also have in this wired negativity bias. So this negativity bias, it's important to remember that we're always going to be going to the negative. And this comes from, people think from the early days when we worked in tribes, when we lived in tribes that made 20, 30, 50 people, that there was value in kind of, closing in on our tribe and having negative views about others. I mean, it might have been a matter of life and death in those days. So it's built into our system to have this negativity bias. So we think we don't. That's really the scary part of it. Dorothy?
Yeah, this is from Adria, who says there's positive, both compassion or negative feelings disrespected. But there's something she adds, it's the third time that he didn't let me know. So sometimes, what you just said, negativity bias,
Right.
when there's data to back up the sense of not feeling respected, that's painful.
Yeah, and I think, and then what happened in the third time? Sometimes people say, well, maybe I should, did you bring it up? Maybe some people get mad at themselves. I didn't bring it up maybe the second time, maybe I should have. And then also, what's happening? Why didn't he? So they have assumptions, and people have different feelings also. So feelings are like one word, like I feel worried, upset, concerned. So the value of this process is getting the skill of naming what's my assumption, realizing it's an assumption, what's my feeling, and then the because is our background, our conditioning. And why do you feel upset? Because probably you felt like, hey, I'm on time, and I learned if I should be on time, others should be on time. Or you have some other history. Maybe you learned to be on time to meetings. So if you came from a military family, maybe you learned to be on time. But I work in Beirut. They all came several hours later than and that was more the norm. As the same company, and where I worked in Vienna, same company, they all came 15 minutes early. So again, what is our background conditions us. But I agree, it makes it worse to think this is a third time. You actually feel like you're more right, which then that's the judgment that you need to manage. So then here's how we would use OASIS to prepare for this conversation. First, you do your own awareness. So this fits in with your model, Dorothy. Yeah. So I noticed the observation, which is the facts. The person's been late 3 times. I became aware of my emotions, my assumptions, and my background. And here's where the art comes in. I have to decide on my history of the person, whether if I assume that the person is, trying to make me look bad as a manager, that might not be the first thing I would say to them. On the other hand, I might say that to them, depending on the history. I might say I'm angry or I'm not. I have to make some choices because I do want to keep the other person open. I don't want to be inflammatory. But on the other hand, sometimes saying I'm angry is the best way to get attention, and it works. So you want to, depending on the relationship, you'll decide what you're going to share, but you want to first become aware of your assumptions, your emotions, and your background. And then the next S is shifting. This is the hardest part of this process, but the most valuable, I think, is noticing when I'm in judgment. Hey, it's the third time. I'm right. The guy's disrespectful. Okay, let me notice my feelings, notice my sensations, step back, and try to be open and curious. Doesn't mean I'm not going to still make the same choice. Maybe I will. And I know managers of this exact case that said, you know what, I got mad and I fired the person in front of the room. They came in late and I just said, you're fired. So that happens sometimes, but how do I manage my time and my reflection before I take my action? That's the S. So maybe I step back and shift and try to be open and curious. And remember, this person has done some good work. They have been committed to the team. There may be something I don't know. And so I get myself open to have the conversation. That's the most important part of this model. Then I is important. What's important to me? It's important to me that we get the team's input on the project Z. What's important to this other person, I have to reflect. I don't know until I ask them, but I assume that they care about the project, and I assume they want the team to do well because they have it to work. And then what's important to us is we both want our team to succeed. We both want to have jobs. And the solution, usually we go right to solution. Hey, you're fired. Or, hey, be here on time because I said it. But we want to, I guess, what solution? I make a hypothesis. Well, I'd love for them, if he can't come to the meeting, I would like to at least have him send his input with somebody. So that's a solution. I would have an idea. So all this is my pre-work. Now I'm going to go talk to him. So I'm going to do this quickly so I can just, so I would then make sure that my energy is open and curious. And my intention is to build a relationship with this person. Even so, I've dealt with my own anger maybe. And then I would use observation. So I'd start with, Jerry, I noticed that this is the third time that you've come 30 minutes late to our morning staff meeting. And the reason I state the observation is because Jerry might be not observing that. He might be thinking, I'm working every night, including weekends for this company. I'm up till midnight. He might not think the staff meeting is very important and may not even be paying attention because he thinks not much happens that first half hour and it's not that valuable to him. So he may not at all even be knowing why you're upset. And a lot of times a lot of times what we really do is we don't talk about it and we just assume. I was with a group of executives yesterday and they said, well, a case like this, I would just assume the person's not committed to the team and I'd stop communicating with them. And that happens a lot. So I start with my O observation. So I notice that you haven't come to the staff meeting the last 3 times. I assume that I'm missing something. I assume something is going on with you. I feel disappointed because I want your input for our important project Z. And I don't understand why you haven't shared with me why you're not coming. But then I go to make sure but my intention of talking to you is to clear this up and to make sure we're working well together. And then I go to I. So tell me what's going on for you here and what's important. So Jerry says, well, Anne, don't you remember that I'm going to a training program? And I would say, no, now I have another problem. I wish you would have shared that with me. But he says, don't you remember in the memo about X, I shared with you that I'm going to the training program. But I said, wow, I would like more notice than that. And I don't even remember the training program. Remember last September, you approved it and it was canceled. And then I have to go in January. Oh boy. Well, okay. Well, and then I realized to myself, I didn't read that email. He was right. He did send an email and I didn't pay attention. I didn't finish reading the email, which happens sometimes. So now, luckily, I tell myself, thank goodness I didn't just jump down his throat. And I say, okay, well, tell me more. Do you need to go to this training program? What's going on? Can you skip some? Because this is a very important project Z. We need your input. And then he tells me, look, it's in his goals. It's going to help with the project Z. He wants to attend. So I give him empathy and say, okay, I realize this is important to you. I know you value this. And then I tell him what's important to me. You know what? I really need your input. The whole team needs your input. And plus, when you come late, then everybody else is coming late. We're wasting a half hour of all these people's time. It's really difficult. So then I is given what's important to you, what's important to me, what's important to us, and what can we do? What's our common ground? So obviously the common ground is we want our team to succeed. We want your input. And this is very important. We don't jump to solution. We try to stay in understanding under the importance element. And then finally we go to S. Usually if we really listen under I, then we already know often solutions pop up easily and it's very solvable. But then under S, we could say, well, what are our options? We can change the time of the meeting. You could call in for the cell phone. We could have you give your report to the colleague to share with us. We could so we explore the different options and we say, okay, what we both agreed on is what we're going to do is we're going to change the time of the meeting for the next 3 meetings when you finish the course. You will go and poll people to see if they can start at 9:30 instead. And then I will send out an email and I'll change my other meeting afterwards. And so we've always solutions are, what are you going to do, when, and how do we know? So this way, everybody has agreement. A lot of times you have a conversation, you think you're in agreement, and then you don't have the agreement. So those are the elements of the conversation. And I'm always thinking, not only am I dealing with the content of my interaction, but I'm also thinking about how to build the relationship. So every interaction is an opportunity to enhance the relationship. And of course, I would assume that I'm building rapport with the people that I interact with. So I'm assuming that at other times I would ask him about his child, talk about the weather, talk about common movies. So building rapport so the person feels like they're in a respectful environment. So I'm assuming that we're working on that as we go along. Often that part gets lost when we feel disrespected, we stop talking to each other. So that's a real quick overview of the process. Are there any comments or questions at this point? So these are actually all things that you do already when you have positive interactions. So how this was developed was by watching people interact. And so the challenge is we stop following this process when we feel disrespected or when we are not, when we have some judgment. So this is to remind us to use this and to assume positive intent when we're in interaction. It's usually, but I think all of these things, most of us already do naturally, but we forget to use them in difficult situations. Okay, anybody have any thoughts or comments?
And it's an opportunity to get a little bit of free coaching from you. So I actually wonder if, in a way you gave it an example of the executive who just didn't understand their impact, but are you going to give an example of how you can show us working with OASIS? Because this model the brilliance is it looks simple, but then it really, what doors it opens up in a difficult situation. Because in a difficult situation, everybody's higher order thinking has been hijacked. Exactly. And this is hard to do in a difficult situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And the key, and I will give an example too, but the key is getting ourselves in this open state, which is not easy. So and I'm going to go through that right now. But let's take the case I gave you earlier of the guy who was going to leave. I mean, he was in a high stress state, and it took courage, and it does take courage for him to, because you know what? I just talked to another leader yesterday, and he feels like he's being cut out of things. And I said, well, have you gone, and he gave me an example. So you have to get to what's the observable data? What makes you think you're being cut out? And he talked about one of his colleagues got a project that he thought it should have been his project. And I said, oh, did you ask? No, I just know I'm going to leave the company. I'm mad. Or you act out, I'm mad. And so I said, it takes courage to be able to say, hey, and that's using observable data. I noticed that my colleague got in a project that I assumed would be my project. I feel disappointed and worried. I feel worried that perhaps there's something I'm not aware of, that you may not think I'm up to it. And I'd like to hear that feedback if there's something I need to know. So he's creating the opportunity, and this one just happened yesterday, so I haven't heard the exact answer on that case, but I have seen many of those exact cases. And then he would give empathy. So the trick is here's the trick. If he could be open, he could give empathy to his boss for not giving him the project. And the boss might say, you know what, I just gave it to their colleague because they were in the meeting, and I actually kind of failed to think about giving it to you and hadn't focused on that it was probably your turn to get this kind of project. So then, ironically, he has to give empathy to the boss. This is hard, but he could say, okay, I understand. And if he can do that, okay, yeah, you must have been under pressure. And then by doing that, the boss will say, hey, I really do regret that I did this. This is a real case I'm thinking of. I didn't really mean to do it, but let's see what we can do for you. And then they came up with the next option, which is you'll get this next project, or here's another project. So again, by not sharing, he could begin to feel I'm not valued. Then he actually stops contributing in the meeting in the way he should or could, and then he becomes less valuable. So you see, it becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. Does that make sense? Yeah, it is looks simple, but it does take some effort. But it does work. People think it may not work, but here's the thing: if you actually are open, and it's a very, very subtle, this openness. It's another person just called. I was just talking to another woman, and she was complaining about her colleague, and her tone was difficult, and then after I gave her empathy, I said, what do you think is going on for this colleague? And then she was able to say, okay, he didn't get the promotion he wanted. He feels like a white male, not really valued in this company. And then she had a lot more, her tone changed. And then she actually was open to him. And then she was going to meet with him. So it takes some effort to get ourselves open. We can get empathy. I'm going to go through right now some ways you can do that. Does that make sense? Or do you have another thought? Okay. So I'm just going to quickly say, I'm doing the Zoom course on this, and we go into each one of these in much more detail, but each has a cue. So the O is just looking out and being aware. I'm not going to move this. The awareness is checking in. I assume, I feel, because, and then there's a practice of literally, I have a practice of just walking down the street, separating my observation from assumption. It seems obvious, but this is a very important skill. And I even look at a plant and I might say, oh, it's beautiful. But then I say, oh, here's a green plant. It has a red bud. And I'm enjoying watching it. So separating the observation from assumption is a very valuable skill that we can develop. And then it's helpful because we usually jump in and think whatever we think is the way it is. So I'm going to do this real quick with you. Some of you may have seen this. Anybody know what is this? I'll mute you for a minute. If you want to say real quick what this is. Anybody?
Roman numeral 7.
Thank you. And then let's see. How would I make this into an 8? How would I make this into an 8 with just one line? You just saw it.
Put one line there.
Perfect. And then what is this?
9.
Okay. And how would I
9.
How would I turn this into a 6 with just one line?
6.
I know you know it, Dorothy, right?
I do.
Yeah. This is a tough one, and takes audiences usually can't figure this out, even though we are so bright and capable. You know? So this is how you turn it into a line, right?
Oh.
Yeah, and it's such a simple. I love this little simple exercise because within about 20 seconds, I conditioned you. I conditioned your mind to be thinking in Roman numeral paradigm and straight line paradigm. And you know what? When we're stuck in that paradigm, we can't get it. We can't. We literally look at that, and people have spent a lot of time. A lot of smart engineers and all kind of people have not been able to figure that out. Usually, the only time someone can figure it out is maybe they come in the room and they're like, "Oh, is it S?" Because they haven't been conditioned, or they weren't paying attention. So I want to just point this out that all the time, by our background, we are conditioned, and we are seeing things from our point of view. And so this is like we have to get it in our system, And wouldn't the world be better if more of us were getting this idea of being open, because we get locked into thinking we're right based on our background and our history. So this is the conditioning that happens to us, and we have habitual patterns that we're unaware of. So this most important thing of this model to me is this shifting. Now, I developed this over 20 years ago, and now there's all the brain research and neuroscience research to support this. And actually, and in my book, I did give a lot of that brain research for all of these steps. So the first thing is just to get a little deeper dive under that S. So it's useful to think about somebody or a situation that bothers you, where you're right and they're wrong. And then the real thing is, where in your body do you notice this response? So years ago, even before somatics became useful or became more prominent, I realized I used to think, I really think this makes sense not to be judgmental. I hope you see that. And I'm not going to judge. So I would say, okay, great. Tomorrow, no judgment for me. I couldn't even get out of bed without judging. I'm like, oh, it's so cold. Oh my goodness, what's the cat doing? We don't. Oh no, I have too much to do. Oh, why is he late? Yeah, so I had so much judgment, And basically, we are judgment machines. We're always thinking we're right. It's just part of our nature. But the key, then how was I going to remember to suspend judgment? You can't do it intellectually. You have to, I believe, you have to, notice your physiological signal, which a lot of us aren't aware of. And I certainly was one who, Dorothy knows me from the beginning of 30 years ago. I was like a bobbing head. I just had thoughts. I never even thought about any sensation in my body. Thanks to Gestalt, I've come a long way. So where in your body do you notice a response? So let's see if anybody knows. And I would say my response is the stomach. My stomach gets tight, and I have a little bird on my shoulder that says, what's he doing? Are you kidding? How could he do that? Sometimes it has more different language, but it's really plural. So anybody else aware of what your signal may be? Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Mine is in my stomach too.
Okay.
And it's not so much about right and wrong, but I know that's what we're talking about. But it's more about they're not listening, like they're not hearing me. I'll get a reaction like that, and I guess if you want to say that could be conceived as wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, good awareness. Good awareness. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else want to share?
And I want to read from Paula.
Okay.
Who says, my mind just keeps going over and over it again and again. I have to keep telling myself to let it go, even when I know it's silly for me to be so upset. The guy has little or no IQ. So she tells herself in her mind.
Right. Good point. Good
Little
point.
or no IQ. That's pretty strong.
Yeah, that's good. So you're churning. Your mind just keeps on going, and churning.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Paula, you get a little headache?
Probably, right?
Probably. Okay. Yes.
Okay, so usually I found all kinds.
And Paula says she just gets more upset with herself.
Yeah, no, it's a habitual pattern. And then what you have to do is say, stop. And this is the worst part. When we think that we're right, even I, after all these years, I'm like, no, this time I know I'm right. This time I am right. So I have to say, no, Anne, stop, step back, and try to be open. Sometimes I hold on to the coat rack. I take off my robe of judgment and hold on to the coat rack. And I still will make the same decision, perhaps. I have a teenager right now, so I have many opportunities to practice this. So by catching myself and saying, nope, I'm going to be open. It's a habitual pattern that can be learned. I think it's essential to be effective these days in this world, to have this skill. And it can be learned, and neuroscience shows that it can be. Let's see. Okay, I don't know if we have somebody wanting to join us. Yep, somebody got put out. Okay. So the key is to catch yourself. Catch yourself. Stop. Step back and shift into being open. So the first is the physiological, and sometimes it takes a little practice for people to learn the physiological. But I found all kinds of things, from tapping your fingers, from the closed throat, to not able to speak very clearly, to hunching over, so I've seen everything. I've even seen people, I remember one guy, he said he smiled. So he and his brother and mother all smiled when they were really upset. And so that was a habitual pattern he learned, and it got him in a lot of fights. A lot of people didn't like that. So the main thing is to tell yourself, this makes sense. I'm going to stop, step back, and shift to being open. And then, let's see. So basically what we're doing here, we're trying to shift and be open instead of just evaluating and judging and going right to solution. That's our goal here. And so we have to hope you understand the value of suspending judgment and make it your intention to do so. Stop when you notice your signal, step back, and then cool down. So I want to think about what are some ways you cool down. So anybody want to share any ways you cool down? This goes back to your resilience strategy. Everybody needs like a list these days and a real plan of what do I do to cool down. It can be very simple things. Just because of time, I'll probably move on and give you some. So here's some ways I've seen. Breathing, that's the first thing. Because what happens is when we're in judgment, we've contracted and we're not getting the full breath. And I usually in my workshops do a whole exercise of breathing, like even really fill your belly and then hold the breath and then let it out through like a straw. So breathing is critical. Getting empathy from a friend. This is what we do naturally. We call a friend and say, do you believe what he did? I can't believe it. So getting real empathy, not somebody saying, oh, he's a jerk. But somebody really thinking of how you're feeling. And then these are just some examples. Take a walk, get some exercise, get a drink of water, take a short break from the situation. Think about a time when you were calmer. Brainstorm other perceptions. Maybe he didn't really mean it. Remind yourself what it's like, what you like about the other person. He's really not such a jerk. Eat chocolate when in doubt. Always good to have some of that around. But there are many, many ways to cool down, and everybody's got to come up with their own strategy. I do a lot of this in coaching. I teach each leader, their own strategy. Sometimes it's simply as you walk from one meeting to the next, feel your feet on the ground. Breathe. Tell yourself it's going to be okay. Tell yourself that you don't see everything. There are ways. So how do you cool down? And then another simple thing is just asking yourself all the time. I ask myself, am I open or am I closed? As I said, I have a teenager who's challenging and for me, and I have to keep on working. And I see a huge difference when I'm open. When I get anxious and worried about her or wanting to tell her she should do, how would I, judgment. When I'm in judgment, even if I say nothing, she's very attuned to it. So my energy is very important. And when I'm open, she'll start telling me, talk to me, tell me things. But when I'm closed, like, why aren't you studying? Then I don't get anything. So, and then after you shift to open, then you want to actually get yourself in this curious state. So this is what I call having a collection of OASIS states. For me, one of mine is being in Santorini, Greece. Oh, I could be there right now. So just being there in this beautiful, I have a picture in my office of the beautiful white buildings with the blue roofs and the beautiful water. And just even thinking of it, I don't know if you could hear my voice, I calm down. And I often use that, and I have a whole collection of those. And I encourage everybody to have like a collection, even on the pictures on their desk, have it maybe in your own calendar, different photos of places. And whenever I have one of those moments, like, oh, I was at the fireworks, it's a beautiful evening, I'm like, oops, snap that picture, another OASIS moment. So I try to get more and more of those OASIS moments so I can be in that moment. And again, this is mindfulness, to get yourself continually moving into this state. The more you can be in this state of openness, your OASIS, then your physiology changes, and then people sense that energy. So it goes back to the leader creating that environment. So it's taking some time to really get, know and how to be in that OASIS state. Not easy in this work environments that are so crazy right now of stress and disruption. And always remember, intentions do not equal impact. Going back to assume positive intent. So here's the shifting. Importance, I'm not going to go over today, but this is probably skills you already use as coaches. But having in mind these questions have been very valuable to me. I'm always thinking what's important to me, what's important to this other person, and what's important to us. And they change in the moment. So it's helpful to use some of those styles like the DISC and others to know, okay, this person's an extrovert, so this might be important to them. But in the moment, what's important to them at this moment? People are changing constantly. So how do you find out what's important to people? You ask them, or you observe, both. And then and that's a useful question. What's important to me? What's important to you? What's important to us? And here are the skills you use. Empathy, mirroring, effective questions. And I would say empathy is so critical. I spend a lot of time in my workshops and really helping people to give empathy. Empathy is huge. And I know a lot of you know how to give empathy, but it's a skill that all of us can learn and develop further. And most important thing I say about empathy is give empathy and then zip it up. Too often we might give empathy and then we keep on going and people don't receive it. You want to make sure people receive the empathy. And empathy makes a huge difference. And again, there are many universal needs, but being respected is one of them. And then finally, the solution is explore different options. So separating, that's another useful skill, not jumping to solution. We all jump to solution. All executives jump to solution. So how do we separate and make sure we've had understanding before we get to solution? And then there's given that X is important to you, Y is important to me, and Z is important to both of us, what are our options? That's the reframing question. And then you define, what are you going to do, when, who's going to do it, and when, and how do we know? So that goes back to observable data. What will we see? That's huge because so often we think we have agreements and we don't. And so often we don't make agreements and we don't have accountability. So I've tried to pack a lot of things in here, and goes back to show you again how each letter, the O and the A, relates to self-awareness. The shift is to self-management, importance is social awareness, and solutions relationship management. Let's see. And then I won't go into this now, but I do think I've worked with a lot of companies to try to change their cultures. And so I think this model relates to, you have to change people's mindsets. What happened there? You have to change, you have to take a systemic perspective to change a culture. So basically you have to make sure the organization and individuals are learning how to have this, what I call an open mindset, and use OASIS as skills. And then the organization has the norms have to fit there. I won't go into this at the moment. So I think this might be a good place to stop and just see if you have any questions or any comments, anything I can do, anything you'd like to do.
And this is Dorothy. I just think it's so powerful to know that at the UN, they're using OASIS for the last 20 years. Can you just give just maybe a few comments on the kind of cultural change you were able to do with using OASIS at the organizational level? Because that's where the action is today, and you have 20 years of real experience there.
Thank you. I started working at the UN, over 20 years ago. I'm not really working with them as much now, but well, I guess I was last year, but I've trained facilitators. So basically, when I came in 20 years ago, I developed their leadership program. So OASIS is the core of the leadership program. I also did OD projects where we would bring in different teams. So use the same model to have people talk to each other, as well as did coaching with them. But I've trained many other facilitators to teach the leadership program. And pretty much to be an effective leader, you need to have these skills to communicate. So this is kind of a package of those skills. But they really, you have many different cultures in the UN. And people came back years later. I mean, I remember, like they said, I took your course 7-8 years ago. I'm still using it. So this is very memorable, which I think that's what I'm probably most proud about. Is it's a memorable process that people can use, and people would put this on their walls and use it. And so more and more people have that. Many managers have this process, and they use it in the meetings. Other companies that I've worked at, like New York Presbyterian Hospital, they actually put this model in. They put it in their conference rooms, and so people in meetings, because I use it also in team building, but in the meetings, people then could just say, follow it. Okay, let's, and you could use it like everybody, let's share your observations about this issue. Everybody shares their observations, and everybody has a different one. When I do a team, I'm doing a team group right now. I interviewed all these different people that are different roles. Everybody is seeing the situation differently based on their vantage point and their role, and their, whether they're an economist or whether they're, a manager or an analyst. Each see it differently. So everybody shares their observations. Then everyone shares their awareness of what they assume, how they feel about it, and what how their background has contributed to it. Then we get everyone to shift and try. This doesn't have to go in this order, but we make sure. I usually start with everybody shifting and being in an open state, and then we give empathy. So I would have the different people give empathy. I'm going to give a meeting this week, and I have the different teams. I get everyone in the room and break into their 4 groups of their roles, and have each of them give empathy to each other and appreciation. And then we together stop and say, okay, what are our solutions? They usually pop up when you are open-minded, people share what's on their mind, and you give empathy and you get the perspectives. It works quite well. It's a very simple process, but I've taught this to many teams, and then people can, it's basically kind of follow the dots, follow the ball. So at the UN, they really have continued to, and they made many changes, but they have kept the OASIS, and they actually put OASIS in many of their programs. They took and it's in many programs, and so more and more people get it. I'd say like New York Presbyterian was another one where many people got it. So then it really shifts the whole. In that place, we called the program Creating an Oasis of Respect, and we talked about respect for patients, respect for clients. And we created that whole environment of wanting to have an environment of respect. They had a merger of 2 different companies, and there was another factor. So this whole idea of respect and creating an oasis, all the leaders took on the role, and It made a huge it's made a huge difference. And many of the companies I worked at, and many people have said this has made a big difference. And many individuals I coach, I use this for coaching also. I had another case recently. This man came into a company, and there's all companies are experiencing disruption. He brought in a new idea which they needed to be effective, but he kind of everybody didn't relate well to him. So he made a lot of enemies, and people were just negative toward him. And he was kind of a bully. It felt like to them a bully, but he learned OASIS. He was able to shift, be open and calm. He went back, he shifted all these relationships, and really was able to improve productivity in this company in a big way. And he attributes it all really to OASIS. And many of my clients do. Many of my clients tell me that their whole leadership role has changed because they have been able to incorporate this into their management. So thank you for asking that. So any comments or questions anybody might have? No. Let's see. Well, what do you think? I think I could give more examples, but I don't know. I feel like I've been talking a lot.
You know what I noticed, that when we're a smaller group, people really hold back. And I think what's so wonderful about this moment is to really hear kind of the connecting the dots. One of the things, Anne, and I just want to say again, I love when you said it's kind of connect the dots. And I thought when it's very, very simple, it's kind of it's a as they say in French, it's a confusing moment because it looks simple, but it allows a person to go very, very deep. And so I wonder what connecting new possibility people are making from this overview of what your model is extremely deep, because it marries mindfulness with also understanding implicit bias, which is the big issue that we're dealing with today, with multiple perspectives and with new possibilities. So I invite people's comments before we close to you as an act of respect. I'm aware of the sound, so.
Well, I'm not an executive coach, but what I think about life in general, and I think about being open to everybody in their story. And a friend of mine had her best friend dying of cancer, and they were taking an elevator at a subway in Boston, and someone yelled at them, like, why did they need the elevator? And it's just people don't know what people know and feel. And I think that I see this more in just everyday life.
Absolutely.
Assuming about someone at a store, or assuming about someone who bumps into you. Maybe they got a million things on their mind, and they, it's just, I just see it in everyday life, in every interaction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's such a great point, because I also tell myself, I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
So and I say I have to slow down to hurry up, because we have no idea what people are going through. And you know what? Everyone is suffering in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's useful to remember that, because it doesn't look like it. They're not. They look like they have it together. They have money, or they have the job. Yeah. But everybody has something going on, and if we can be compassionate, and that really makes life better for everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's all I can say.
Okay. Thanks.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. So I love what you said. It's a great model. I'm doing a team offsite next week, and I've been thinking about empathy and having these kinds of dialogues, but I've never seen this model before. So I'm assuming we can use it as long as we acknowledge you. Is that correct?
Sure.
Okay. So I'm going to add to what you say. We don't know what's happening with people, and we don't know what's happened in the past to people.
Right.
So it's kind of like youth that are acting out these days, and people see acting out, but they don't see underprivileged. They don't see poverty. They don't see lack of parental support. All the things that result in kids acting out. So that's just one example that happens to be on my mind, because I'm involved with an organization here that's working with incarcerated youth. But it's not only what's happening now, it's what has happened.
Exactly. That's a great point. That's really a very important point, because we're all influenced by our history, and we're often unaware of how that influence. So that's a really important point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good point.
Thank you.
Good luck with your team.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Well, I could ask a question. Are you able to hear me?
Sure.
Your work reminds me a little bit of working with the conflict dynamics profile and helping clients create a practice of managing triggers and using constructive skills. And I just wondered if in your one-on-one coaching or in your team coaching, do you ask people to do this as a practice when they're not together in their personal lives? Just try to build muscle that way.
Yeah, excellent question. Actually, I plan to offer a program called, creating an OASIS within, because I think we have the same dynamics inside of us. So, I mean, I know I always have one side of me, wants to, do 20 things, and the other side doesn't want to, or, there's just conflictual pieces. I don't know if that's exactly what you're asking, but I think if we can learn also to create the OASIS within and manage the different parts of ourselves. Is that what you're asking, though? I don't know.
Well, my question, I think that's also valuable. I wondered, for instance, if you ever have one of your coaching clients go through the steps and say, so, here's something to experiment with. Keep a journal on nothing but observations.
Oh, yeah.
And then just pay attention to that level. And then observation, then awareness, and practice when you're at dinner or out with friends or whenever to sort of build this capacity outside of the workplace.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, some of the exercises are, as you're walking to work, just continually notice your observation and then your assumption. So it's like take pictures, or in your mind without a camera. So this is my observation. This is my assumption. This is how I feel about it. So I'm walking along and I see a truck, and then immediately I feel irritated because why is that truck in the middle of the road? Okay, so notice, what's my observation? There's a truck in the middle of the road. And then what do I assume? I assume that it's not it's just taking care of its own needs and not aware of me as a driver. What do I feel? Angry. What's my signal? I feel my heart beating and I want to say something. Okay, so it's like walking through it. Yes. What do I need here? What may he need? Okay, there's no other. This is Chicago. I live in Chicago. There's not really anywhere to park. Oh, how would I be if I were empathetic to him? Well, I don't want to be right now because I'm mad. Okay, notice it. You know what I mean? So it's kind of walking through. What are some solutions?
Did you ever have everybody on your team do that practice outside of work and then just come back and talk about what they happen in their practices?
Absolutely. In fact, that's what I do. I have a 6-week program on OASIS, and each week we do 1 or 2 of these letters, and that's the homework in between.
Great.
And that's really the fun. People come back and they're like, oh my gosh. I remember one person, it's really interesting in a group because she was really irritated because the person snow plowing her house didn't come on time. And then, then how she felt about it, how she tried to talk with him, etc. So, and then other people got irritated with her. Why does she care about the snow? But then they found out that she was snowbound because she lived in Wyoming and she couldn't get out, and she's a single, her husband recently passed away. So, you know what I mean? So a lot of it is learning like that. All these are practices and we build the skills, and now the research shows that we build these neural pathways. So, but thank you for asking.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right.
I want to bring in Paula's voice, and who says, I don't know what I don't know, and that this is really helpful to remember in those difficult situations, and she thanks you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm aware, and that yes. the time is up, and what's really fascinating just to listen to you is the profound kind of depth of this, including your next thinking that you want to develop and offer to bring people into their inner oasis. There's a phrase from the author Annie Lamott who says, my mind is a bad neighborhood that I wouldn't want to invite people into. And I think so many of us know that, and the power of our own biases, and even this phrase that Paula, really underlined, and that is, I don't know what I don't know. I've seen some of the most wise and profound people say that in a moment of real heat, and all of a sudden everything has changed with one compassionate statement about, I don't know what I don't know.
Exactly.
So I want to really just thank you for bringing us to this really deep, profound kind of moment and ask you what your experiences has been with us.
No, I've really enjoyed being with you, and it's fun to to share this with you. And I appreciate the questions too about practice, and then you're already thinking about applying something. So that's, and you, Andrea, too, with your applying it with family, with others. I mean, this is really what my personal mission and goal is to help. I do think the world, I think everyone should think of what can I do to make the world better in my little sphere. And this is my goal, is to help get people to adapt this open mindset. So I appreciate your time that you've devoted to this, and I encourage you to share it with others. So thank you. Thanks, Dorothy. And I think this fits right in with your wonderful work on creating awareness, right? So you see the synergies between your work, I think, and mine. So.
Well, and I really want to thank you, Anne, because I think what I wanted to say in everyone's company is the tremendous embodiment of this material that you really live and preach and teach and show. And I think we felt a moment of that with you in this little tiny hour and 15 minutes. And that these tips you give so many examples in OASIS conversations. But, I really want to, on your behalf, welcome people to reach you at your email address is, can you say it out loud?
It's A Van Aaron, so A and then VANERON @potentials.com. And I have two websites. So there's one called oasisconversations.com, which will be about the book. And then I also have potentials.com, which is my company. So thank you. And we're happy to connect with people on LinkedIn, and happy to have further discussion with you and those who are going to be listening to this later. So thank you all, and wish you all the best.
And thanks for giving us your profound expertise. And I also want to thank everyone for joining us. Everyone on this call is a major practitioner and actually a very giving person in my experience, both either limited or longer. I personally thank you for coming here together. Nice to see you. Until the next time we meet, go well, be well, stay well. Thank you.
Thanks, Dorothy.
Everybody, thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Andrea. And we close. Thank you, Anne.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.